The Washington Commanders uncovered some hidden studs in 2024, had some players that we were also stunned to see not do so well. So in 2025, I've got 10 players for you today that might fall on either side of that line right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome inside today's episode of Locked On Commanders. I'm your host, David Harrison, here with you every Monday through Friday. Your eyes, your ears, your friend on the ground covering the Washington Commanders. Doing so for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. Also helping out with WUSA 9, your local DC CBS affiliate, and their local coverage of the team as well. I want to thank you for coming through today for this episode in which we are going to be talking about studs that could appear from the 2025 Washington Commanders roster and players that we could see struggle. We might be a little stunned to see not do as well as we might think. We've got 10 players coming for you today. Of course, every day, those of you who come through for every single episode, I want to give you a special thank you for coming through again for today's episode. And if anybody out there is not already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this show right now. If you're new to the show, welcome. Locked On Commanders is a daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm glad that you found us. Hopefully you stick around and come back some more. So this episode is not a mailbag episode, but full disclosure, the idea was presented in a mailbag submission from Dr. Wonderful, one of our more consistent mailbag contributors from the Insiders. In fact, one of our more consistent insiders just in general. Dr. Wonderful takes advantage of the Zoom calls, takes advantage of the text messaging ability. We have several conversations about free agents, draft targets, just general football items, and obviously submits a lot of questions to the mailbags. And this one really basically inspired this entire episode, right? So Dr. Wonderful said, I'd like your prediction for studs and stunners. First of all, I like the way that is put there. I hate the word duds because I think sometimes it feels just a little bit disrespectful. Who do you think is going to be a stud for Washington this year? And who do you think is going to stun us this year? I think that part is also very interesting as well. So I've got 3 studs for you, 3 stud predictions. We've got 3 players that we might be stunned to see not do so well. And then at the end of the episode, I'm going to give you 2 more Darkhorse candidates, players that are maybe a little bit in the realm of not going to be there, or just we'll talk about why they're in those categories. Okay, so all of these are a little bit Darkhorse, right? Because it would be a little bit weak for me to sit here and say, well, quarterback Jaden Daniels, I think is going to be a stud, because that's not a hard thing to talk about, and not all of these are going to be hard anyway. But we're going to start it all off. So like I said, 10 players total. We're going to start with the studs. We'll get into the players I think might stun some folks on how they do. And there might be a few players here that some of you out there are on board with and say, well, that's not really that deep of a pull. That's fine too. I'm not going to say names just for the sake of saying names either. But there is a player that some people have some concerns about. A player that some people say even drafting or even trading a 5th round draft pick to bring in is overpaying. And that is wide receiver Deebo Samuel, who I think could be a stud on this 2025 Washington Commanders roster. First and foremost, just turned 29 in January, so he's still on the right side of 30, still young enough, does have a little bit of an injury history, also had battle with pneumonia last year, ended up in the hospital and was unable to work out for a while and things like that, which certainly impacts a lot of the things that he went through during the course of the season. But he played 15 games for the San Francisco 49ers in 2024, came away with 51 receptions, 670 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, added 42 carries, 136 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, a down season for sure, right? A lot of those numbers are either like second or third fewest for him. Total production was not that great for him. Obviously less than 1,000 yards of total offense, and he's supposed to be one of the premier players on that San Francisco 49ers roster. Now, and I would say, not to excuse it necessarily, things like that, right? But Christian McCaffrey's situation, not having a guy like Christian McCaffrey in the backfield is big. Losing Brandon Ayuk to a torn ACL during the season is big. Not having your 1st round receiver, Ricky Pearsall, available because he ends up getting shot, before the season even begins and has to come back and recover from that is big. There's just a lot of things like the San Francisco 49ers were a little bit snake bitten in 2024, and Deebo Samuel certainly was not spared from that, whatever curse or something, whatever was going on there on the West Coast just was not good for anybody involved with the San Francisco 49ers. And I would also add in there, Jaden Daniels, a little bit of a different type of quarterback than Brock Purdy. Look, I like Brock Purdy, but Brock Purdy, quite honestly, has kind of entered the realm that Dak Prescott was in for me at one point in time, whereas, and also Russell Wilson for that matter, as in where coming out in the NFL draft, I was higher on those three men, specifically Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, than pretty much everybody else. And their draft status would tell you I was higher on all three of those guys. They get into the NFL. They do some good things. Suddenly, next thing you know, I'm looking at the national narrative on these guys. I'm saying, hey, like, they're not that great. Like, they're good, but they're not as great as now they're being sold off to be. And that's basically where I've gotten to with Brock Purdy, because I think Brock Purdy is certainly a good quarterback, serviceable quarterback. Do I think he makes the San Francisco 49ers better? No. Like, by himself, does he elevate the players around him? I don't believe so. I think what he does is he navigates very well. He knows how to get the ball out. He knows how to execute Kyle Shanahan's scheme, and that's not an insult. That's very good. Joe Flacco won a Super Bowl that way. Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl that way, right? So that's not a knock, but I'm just saying that when you lose Christian McCaffrey, you lose Brandon Ayuk, you have all these other injuries, and you yourself, Deebo Samuel, you are dealing with pneumonia, you're dealing with injury yourself. It's just bound to happen, right? So again, not to excuse it, but all those things contributing here in Washington, you have a quarterback that, at least in 1 year's sample size, does look like he elevates the offense, does look like he can help elevate people around him. Like Terry McLaurin, not necessarily a better receiver physically, like individually in a vacuum with Jaden Daniels, but I think we can all agree, like, we've never seen Terry McLaurin have as much of a productive season, especially once they got rolling, than he has with Jaden Daniels, right? So clearly, Jaden Daniels is a player who can force multiply the talent on the team, and he can do so with Deebo Samuel as well. Jaden Daniels was top 10 in 2024 in passes at or behind the line of scrimmage last season. Those passes he averaged 7.7 passes per game at or behind the line of scrimmage without Deebo Samuel, who's pretty good in that area of the game. Now, you go back to Kliff Kingsbury's history with Kyler Murray in Arizona. Kyler averaged 9 to 10 passes at or behind the line of scrimmage per game, while Kliff Kingsbury was the head coach and play caller for the Arizona Cardinals. Deebo, just last year, averaged 6.6 yards per carry, or per catch rather, at or behind the line of scrimmage, without a legitimate receiver opposite of him, battling the illnesses, battling the injuries, no legitimate running back, no running threat at quarterback, all of these things, right? He averaged 6.6 yards per catch. He averaged 13 plus yards per catch on those types of passes in 2021, his best season so far. So clearly there's a delineation there. I think that with the Washington Commanders, with Kliff Kingsbury and his play designs and his penchant for his passion for those types of plays, the fact that defenses can't just bail out, you've got to watch Jaden Daniels, because that could also be an RPO. It could be a keeper, an RPO keeper, to where his option is throw the ball out to Deebo, 0 yards or at the line of scrimmage or behind it, let him do his thing, or keep the ball yourself. So if you overcommit to Deebo right away, Jaden Daniels is going to take off on you. You stay home, now Deebo's got more room. You do it opposite of Terry McLaurin, there's a problem. You get the running game going, there's a problem, right? So I think that, again, this offense, this coach, this quarterback, the health, all of it snowballs into the potential for Deebo Samuel to be a stud in the Washington Commanders roster, or for the Washington Commanders in the 2025 NFL season. So that's my first stud prediction for the 2025 roster. I think this is a fun topic. I think we can do this again as we get closer to training camp, maybe add some rookies to the mix here, things like that. But right now we're going to do it here in the offseason. Deebo Samuel, my first guy. We're about 12 days or so from the Washington Commanders starting their offseason program as we talk about this. So relevant topic here today. We'll continue. 2 more studs, 3 players that you might be stunned to learn, I think, may not live up to expectations, coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching a last-minute Major League Baseball showdown, or soaking in the excitement of an NBA matchup, or seeing your favorite team win on a Hail Mary pass at the end of the game. Whatever it is, finding great seats at a great price, that is the challenge until you go to Game Time. When you go to Game Time, you're going to find that scoring last-minute tickets is easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the events get closer, and with their all-in pricing toggled on the app, you can see the total cost up front. No surprises for you at checkout. And one of the best things about it is you get their last-minute deals where you save up to 60% off those last-minute tickets to sports, but also concerts, comedy, theater, pretty much anything. And you can even see the view of your seat in many locations before you buy the ticket, so you know what you're getting into before you click the final purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDON NFL, Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Continuing with today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're identifying 3 studs, 3 players that you might find be stunned to find won't do as well as maybe they should in the team or within the team or in the system that they're playing in. And I'm going to wrap up today's episode giving you 2 more Darkhorse studs, 2 more Darkhorse players that might stun some people. That's how we're doing this. Thanks to Insider Dr. Wonderful for bringing up the topic. Second stud. So first stud, Deebo Samuel. I already talked about some of the reasons I think that he could be a stud in this year's offense for the Washington Commanders. The unfortunate part to that would be, or could be, he's currently on a 1-year deal. His deal expires at the end of this season. Could find him as a free agent next year. And, the upside to that is if that happens and he gets signed away somewhere for a lot of money, potentially the Washington Commanders would be in line for a 2027 compensatory draft pick. Or maybe they just resign him and it's not a problem. We get 2026 Deebo Samuel as well. My next stud prediction, this one's going to be a little bit harder for this player to live up to, but I'm going to go with second-year tight end Ben Sinnott. And if you go back to, we had a mailbag question not that long ago where one of the insiders asked or wanted to know what the beat consensus would be on a breakout player for 2025. Ben Sinnott was one of those players. Ben Sinnott and Johnny Newton actually were tied for the top vote getter. So Ben Sinnott being here on my potential studs list for the Washington Commanders in 2025, not a huge surprise for everydayers, especially if you remember that episode. But the fact that he is still currently projected to be the 3rd tight end on the depth chart, I think that could be where a little bit of surprise comes in for this type of thing. Played 17 games in 2024, so all the regular season games in 2024, credited with 2 starts, according to Pro Football Reference. Had 5 receptions on 5 targets, 28 yards, and a touchdown. So not a lot of production. He played 27% of the offensive snaps. Zach Ertz played 66% of the offensive snaps, and John Bates played 44% of the offensive snaps. Now, the reason I have Ben Sinnott on this list is, one, I know internally there's a lot of excitement about Ben Sinnott, and I don't think that this franchise is going to want to wait fully halfway into his rookie deal, right? He's not a first-round pick, so his rookie deal is only 4 years. So if you make him sit again for another year and then say, oh, well, we'll tap in all that excitement in year 3, you're already over halfway through his contract before you even really start to put him on the field. So I feel like he's going to get time on the field this year. I'm not saying he's going to be the starter. He's going to overtake Zach Ertz or anything like that. But I think what you might see is tight end total usage climb, right? So for the entire group. But I think Zach Ertz coming in closer to 60% than he did 66% might be in the cards. One, preserve him a little bit. He is another year older, things like that. John Bates, I think his usage rate might go up from 44% to closer to 50%. And then Ben Sinnott's rate could climb from 27% closer to 35 to 40%. So you see Ben Sinnott get more reps, John Bates get more reps, Zach Ertz get a more manageable workload, and the entirety of the tight end usage goes up in totality in that mixture, right? And I think that you do that, Ben Sinnott gets more opportunities to perform. I'm not saying I would necessarily draft him in your fantasy league, right? Like I'm not going to go that far, but I think we certainly see an uptick in Ben Sinnott. Plus, you have to go beyond the stats as well. And Commanders fans, especially those of you who watch every game, you know that as well. We saw Ben Sinnott lay some really good blocks on people, was a lead blocker on several plays. He's a very versatile part of this offense that I think we're going to see Kliff Kingsbury get more usage out of in 2025. Finally, my last stud prediction. This one's going to take a bigger prediction, because he was already a stud. Linebacker Frankie Luvu. But in my prediction, I'm saying I think Frankie Luvu has the opportunity, has the potential here this season to take that next step towards becoming a first-team All-Pro. He was a second-team All-Pro last year. I think this year he can get to that first-team All-Pro level. Look, he played 98% of defensive snaps last season. I would like that number to be closer to, say, 90%, maybe like 92%, right? You love having him on the field, but if you can find a guy worth rotating him with just a little bit, just to keep him fresh a little bit. Look, you're up 10 in the second quarter. They haven't been moving the ball very well. Let Frankie get a breather here. Let Frankie sit on the sideline. Let this other guy go out there, get a few reps, get a series in, something like that. Let's preserve Frankie, keep him fresher for some of those closing moments. If you remember the games last year, there were several games where down the stretch, down the final moments of the game, you could just tell dude was gassed. You know what I mean? He's a human being. Like, and he would never say that in an interview. Bobby Wagner would never say in an interview, yeah, we were exhausted, things like that. And I get it, totally respect it. But the bottom line is there were definitely games where they were gassed because they're just out there for so stinging long. So if you can keep him a little bit fresher, one, you're still going to get the same production. You might get better production because he's fresher later in the game, taking advantage of some of those clutch opportunities. And those moments will make him stand out in the national stage a little bit better and get some of those votes he needs to become a first-team All-Pro. So those are the reasons I think that Frankie Luvu could be that stud, and as far as taking that next step in that evolution of already being a stud. I mean, he played 1,059 snaps in 2024, which was nearly 70 snaps more than he played in any other season in the entirety of his career. That's a whole game's worth of snaps more in 2024 than he played in any other year of his career. He did come away with the career-high sacks number with 8. Joe Witt Jr. continuously tinkering with his defensive scheme throughout the season. I think his second season, he's going to come in with a better base knowledge of what his defense is and could be, where he wants to take it. So I think next year you'll hopefully see less tinkering as we go through and a little bit more solidified with that. Also, you see Frankie Luvu's role. You know, this is also Joe Witt Jr.'s second year having Frankie Luvu on the roster. So a little bit better of an idea of how to employ him fully, things like that. So in theory, if the unit in front of Frankie gets better as well, they'll lead up more blocks, open up more lanes, and you might be able to see him potentially hit double-digit sacks. So those are our 3 studs: Deebo Samuel, Ben Sinnott, your tight end, and linebacker Frankie Luvu. Let's get to the players that you might be stunned by not doing as well as maybe they should. And this first one, I'm going to admit, you're probably not going to be surprised by it. Defensive tackle Daron Payne. Look, 11.5 sacks in his contract year a few years ago, 5 sacks in his rookie year. Those are his 2 highest sack production seasons. Every other year, he's hit no more than 4.5 sacks in any other season. So basically, motivated by his first year in the league, motivated by the opportunity to make money. Outside of that, just not a lot of production. 18 tackles for loss in his contract year, 13 the next season, 5 in 2024. So that number is dipping significantly. Double-digit quarterback hit numbers from 2021 to 2023, down to 5 in 2024. 2024 also saw Payne have a career low in tackles, also a career low in snaps. Some of those things may correlate. Some of those things may be leading to one another. There's been a lot of talk this offseason, really from within the Commanders' circle, but not inside the Commanders' building, right? Not a lot of smoke coming out of Ashburn that Daron Payne is going to be traded, but certainly a lot of conversation. We've had some conversations here on the show about Daron Payne potentially being traded draft weekend, stuff like that. Basically, Jonathan Allen is now out, so Daron Payne is taking that spot as the defensive player that everybody thinks might be traded coming up next. So Daron Payne, you know, again, unfortunately, because of kind of how his career trajectory has gone, I remember his contract year, even though he had that great season, a lot of people were like, dude, don't pay him that much because, you know, he only did it in his contract year. You need to see him do it in a non-contract year. So, you know, we'll see. Running back Jeremy McNichols is another one. I like Jeremy. I think that we've basically seen the best of Jeremy McNichols. I think that, you know, we pretty much know who he is. Like, he's not a guy who's still developing, still growing. He pretty much kind of is who he is at this point in time. I think there's just a lot of things stacked against him having even as good of a season as he did last year. And certainly he had some opportunities, played about 20-25% of most games during the regular season, had that really great game against the Arizona Cardinals, if you remember that. But I just think that with the consensus, there's a lot of people in the media here in DC that think that the Washington Commanders are going to draft a running back in the first 2 days. That guy is probably going to get some touches, right? Going to get some work. Austin Eckler is trying to be healthier, and he's a veteran. Brian Robinson Jr. is trying to come back healthier and improve some things. There's the determination behind Jeremy of Chris Rodriguez Jr., who knows that he needs to have a better training camp, better offseason showing this year than he did last year, trying to get some snaps, trying to justify that. So there's just a lot going against Jeremy McNichols having even the same amount of impact that he was able to have in 2024. So I just feel like he's a player that, even not necessarily anything he's doing wrong or not doing, but just the circumstances seem to be stacked against him, having as big of an impact as he even did in 2024 as the third running back on the team. Defensive end Clelin Ferrell is our final guy that we're going to put in the stun category. And again, everydayers, if you've been listening to me, you know I've not been super high on Clelin, his total package that he brings to the Washington Commanders, and I don't think it's insignificant that Dietrich Wise Jr., the free agent signed from New England, was actually agreed to before Clelin Ferrell was brought back in and re-signed. Not telling you that Dietrich Wise is going to take all of Cleveland's snaps or anything like that, but I don't think Clelin Ferrell is going to be even as solidified as a starter, as much of a consistent presence on the field in 2025 as he was in 2024. Potential even for a rookie to come in. Edge is still very high on most people's needs for the Washington Commanders entering the NFL draft period. So if they go out there and get an edge like JT Tuimoloau out of Ohio State, or a guy like Mike Green in round 1 on day 1, clearly I think that's a potential for Clelin Ferrell to get pushed even further down the usage chart. So I think Clelin Ferrell is that third player. So Daron Payne, Jeremy McNichols, Clelin Ferrell, my 3 guys that I think some might be stunned to see not have as much of an impact from last year to this year or at all, to be honest with you. So those are our main ones. I've got 2 Darkhorse studs, 2 Darkhorse stunner players coming up for you to wrap up this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Closing out today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're talking about studs, and we're talking about players that we might be stunned to see not perform as well as we think they could or should in this scheme, in this team, on this team in 2025. I've given you 3 studs. I've given you 3 stuns. We're going to give you 2 more on each category that might be a little bit of a dark horse candidate. And basically, what I'm telling you is it just kind of goes against the narrative around these players. Brian Robinson Jr., I think, is a dark horse to be a stud. For one, this is a guy who hears the noise, right? So as Commanders fans are talking about he should be traded, as outlets, including CommanderGameDay.com, part of Sports Illustrated, not that I'm writing all of them, but they are being written, Brian Robinson Jr. should be traded, that the team needs a new RB1, all these things. I'm telling you, he's not seeing all of it, maybe, but he's definitely seeing some of it. Brian Robinson Jr. is a guy that when you put a chip on his shoulder, he will carry that chip proudly and he will look to make you eat it. Health, I think, is a big part of it. All right. 3 injuries suffered on his right leg in 2024. I don't think that's a non-factor. I think that was a factor to the fade that he had at the end of the season, where we saw him just kind of limp out of the year, unfortunately. So he's had some time, hopefully, to recover. Hopefully, had some time to heal, get stronger in those areas, whatever he needs to do to fix those potential injuries from happening in the future. So I could see a resurgent season from Brian Robinson Jr. It could be a situation where the Washington Commanders go out there and they do draft a running back on day 2, and yet that running back has a little bit of a hard time hitting the field because Brian Robinson comes out and shows that he is still the best running back on the depth chart. So that's one of my dark horse players to be a stud this year. One of my dark horse players to stun some folks, wide receiver Luke McAffrey. And it's nothing that Luke is doing, nothing against Luke McAffrey. I think Luke has all the potential in the world. But I went through this last year. A lot of insiders, a lot of Commanders fans just in general, just really, really, really wanted to see that Luke McCaffrey explosion game, that Luke McCaffrey breakout game, and it just didn't come. And I think, honestly, part of it is just because of the players that were on the field, right? Terry McLaurin, Noah Brown, Zach Ertz, Olamide Zaccheaus at stretches, Jamison Crowder, right? There's just a lot of players there to kind of keep up with. Luke McCaffrey is still very early in his wide receiver development, relatively speaking, compared to other receivers in the National Football League. And I don't know if the expectation, I don't even put expectation because people weren't really down on Luke when it didn't happen. I'll put anticipation. How about that? I think maybe the fan anticipation and even the media anticipation. I remember at one point kind of saying to myself, Luke McCaffrey does a lot of interviews in the locker room for a guy that has as little production as he has. And I think a lot of people are really excited, were really excited, are still really excited. And I just wonder if we collectively are a little bit more excited than we should be as far as putting pressure on him. Now, Luke grew up in an NFL family, so I don't believe that any fan excitement or anticipation or media anticipation is putting undue pressure on him. I'm not saying that. But coming in this year, too, I'm already hearing it that a lot of people are like, oh, well, Luke McCaffrey's going to take a step forward. It could be Terry, Deebo, and Luke. Noah Brown might fall down to receiver 4, right? I've had people come to me and say they don't need to draft a receiver because you've got Luke McCaffrey there. He's going to step up this year, and you certainly hope he does. But I think there's a potential there from the amount of excitement I'm already hearing, and then the hiring of Wes Welker has only accelerated or amplified that excitement. I just think there is a possibility there that Luke McCaffrey could be a player that people are stunned by the lack of production if he still needs a year or two to really start to fully develop as a receiver in the National Football League. Second stud dark horse, defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw. Javon Kinlaw has gotten a lot of hate. Javon Kinlaw is another guy that's seen the hate. You know what I mean? A lot of people talking about his contract, talking about he's been overpaid and all this other stuff. And I just look at it, man. Adam Peters knows Javon Kinlaw. Adam Peters knows what kind of player they want on that defense. He knows what kind of attitude they want in that locker room. I just feel like that there's a very high possibility that this is going to be a really great fit for Javon. I think Javon has been healthier, this last year with the New York Jets than he has been in a long time. I think he's very, very conscious of his mind or of his body, and he's mindful of how he takes care of it. And if he can stay healthy for a good portion of this season, I think Javon Kinlaw could really surprise the people in this scheme. And then stunner, I'm going to go with Dorrance Armstrong Jr. I think Dorrance Armstrong Jr., and I'm one of the people who does it, we give him a lot of credit for the non-stat impact that he had on the field. And I think it's certainly warranted, but I think this year he's got to have some of that production. He's got to get some of those sacks. He's got to get some of those tackles for losses. We got to see him really be an edge setter on that side of the line for this defense, because I think that 1 year of, the stats weren't there. The production wasn't necessarily through the roof, but look at all these other things he was doing that don't hit the stat box. I think you can do that for 1 year. 2 years, especially when you're playing in a defense that you're familiar with coming from the Dallas Cowboys with a coordinator that Joe Witt Jr., 2 years of that, I think people are going to be very disappointed if they see that out of Dorrance Armstrong Jr. For a second year. So there's 10 Commanders, 5 that could be studs, 5 that could stun us with how little or how low production they perform with in 2025. The studs, again, wide receiver Deebo Samuel, tight end Ben Sinnott, linebacker Frankie Luvu, your dark horses, running back Brian Robinson Jr., and defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw. The stun category, the stun nominees, defensive tackle Daron Payne, defensive end Cleveland Farrell, running back Jeremy McNichols, and then your dark horses, wide receiver Luke McAffrey, and defensive end Dorrance Armstrong Jr. For our next episode of Locked On Commanders, we're going to start hitting our draft preparation fast. Well, not fast, but a little bit heavier than we have been so far. We're going to take a position group of need. Edge, might be corner, might be running back. We're going to take a position group, and we're going to dive deep. I'm going to build out our Locked On Commanders big board for the NFL draft weekend coming up here in just a short period of time. So in the meantime, if you got questions or comments or topics, just like Dr. Wonderful did for this episode, all you got to do is text them to me. To do that, become a Locked On Commanders insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders and sign up to get the first 2 weeks free. You'll text me, I'll text you. And right about now is perfect time to get in on it, because NFL draft weekend, I'm going to be sending a whole lot of text messages. For your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get your latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day right here where you're listening or watching Locked On Commanders. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thanks for coming through every single day. And if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind, so I can see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.